differences between A and B and C and D. When you get to your monthly chart, it starts to become a tremendous amount of time similarity between waves, and that is not allowed in flats, zigzags, or triangles. So this is another huge differentiator between orthodox Elliott wave and neo wave, that measuring time is you can't do good wave analysis without measuring time. So in neo wave, it's an integral part of the process, and you have to consider it to determine what kind of correction you're in. So when I started to notice that wave C was similar in time to wave D, which was similar in time to wave E, and in a diametric I've learned in the last few years, you can actually combine two waves sometimes. So A plus B actually equals wave C, D, and E. That we have 4 segments so far that are equal in time. If we count this last one, we would have 5. And I'm measuring time from the beginning of the pattern, not from the low of the pattern. That's allowed. Typically, if you're beginning from a pattern, the future low or high is where you want to end time. But when then you're measuring the new pattern, you typically want to start from the beginning of the pattern. So you begin the pattern here and time would end here. You begin the new time measurement from here. It's possible it could be from here, but typically it would start from the actual beginning of the pattern. If you were measuring time going forward from this low, you would normally, if for some reason time ended there, you would normally count it as being here as the end of wave F, or the low of wave F would be the legitimate time measurement for wave F, because this is the lowest point beginning from some previous point in time. But when you're measuring forward, you would start from the end of wave F and go forward from there. I know this is a little complicated, but that's just the way it works. Okay, so as it stands right now, we have 3 waves that are equal in time. We have a 4th one that may be, and if we add 2 together, we have a 5th one. And in diametrics, you're going to typically have 5 waves that are similar and 1 or 2 that are different. Since we've added 2 together, there's only going to be 1 that's left that's different. In this case, that would be the F wave. So if we measure the F wave from high to low, it's drastically different than the other waves, because from here to here, it's only about a quarter of the time. You measure from here to the next low, it's only about 61% of the time. If you measure from beginning to end, it's only about 75%. Similarity requires that it's around 85, 90, 95% to 100%. Anywhere around 61% is not considered similar. 75% is really not similar either. It needs to be in the 85 or higher, up to maybe 15. So 15% below to 15% above can be considered similar. From high to low wave F is vastly different. So that clearly would be one of the waves that is different in time. So we know we have 1 wave different in time. We know we have 4 waves that could be almost exactly equal in time or extremely close. And if we add these 2 together, that gives us the 5th one. If we don't, then we could say one of them is different in time. But we want to have a total of 5. By adding them together, it allows us to have that 5th one that could be equal. Now, the same phenomenon that we're seeing on the 6 monthly charts, we're probably going to get a little bit of supplemental time action here. Ideal time ended right there, right at the high. And that's not a coincidence, in my opinion. It's based on the total time of the previous 3 waves added together of the same degree, and that's the standard typical limit for a pattern of the same degree. But in triangles, you typically get supplemental price and time. So this is probably part of that phenomenon happening at the very tail end. And remember, this is a 6-month high-low chart. So every single dot is up to as much as 6 months. So this supplemental price and time action could be, a few dots past the ideal time. Those few dots could be another year. So we already have 6 months past the ideal time. I don't think it's going to take more than maybe 3 to 6 more months, and that'll be the end of wave D. Okay, and that's because monthly charts are getting very close to the end of their structure also. So let's get back to our monthly chart. So in this monthly chart, we have the evidence of a diametric because we have so many patterns that are similar in time. That's not allowed in triangles, flats, or zigzags. So we have to move on to the next category of pattern development, which would be a diametric. So if we're in a diametric, we want the G wave to take around the same amount of time as the other patterns, which means we're running into that time period right now. Now, as far as the structure of wave G, it's a little difficult to say what it is right now, but there's some evidence that we're dealing with an expanding triangle for the G wave. So between here and here, the evidence is starting to suggest we're in an expanding triangle. The reason is this gets into very subtle behavior observations that most people would never pay attention to, don't even know exist. But when it comes to contracting triangles, there's very specific behavior requirements, and that's that the thrust should be approximately equal to the biggest wave of the pattern, at least as big as the same direction wave. The A wave is normally the one you would use to compare. That's going counter trend to the thrust. The B wave is going with the thrust, and it's a smaller degree than the G wave itself. This B wave is one lower degree than the entire G wave. So normally the move in the same direction as the future uptrend would be the minimum amount of price that we would have to move as we thrust out of the triangle. But you can see it's the same time, but a little bit less. It's only about 70% of the width of this B wave. So either this count is wrong and we didn't finish a contracting triangle, or the exception comes in, and the exception is there's always an exception to every rule and every pattern. The exception is that if you're going to have a contracting triangle, this one looks really good and follows all the rules and can channels well, and the A wave is really violent and all that. The only exception to the thrust rule is if the pattern that the thrust is part of has an expanding bias. So the market is delaying the exciting event until the very end. So it means that if this is the thrust out of this contracting triangle, because it's substandard, it's smaller than the B wave, that means that this future up move has to be an expanding triangle. So wave G would have to be an expanding triangle. So the thrust would be wave A. Obviously, the reaction would be wave B. Either wave C is over, or we're still working on the C wave. In this case, the C wave is a little bit longer than wave A, which is the minimum requirement. This is the length of wave A, and that's the length of wave C. You can see wave C is a little bit longer. You go through the book in chapter 5 and look at expanding triangles, you'll read there that the C wave needs to be a little bit longer than wave A, and it typically will be a little more complicated, which this one is. And then we'll start the D wave, and the D wave needs to overlap the range of wave B. So somewhere between this high and this low, the D wave needs to fall somewhere in that range, and then we would begin the final exciting mania phase of this pattern for wave G. Now, this will put us into supplemental price and time action also. Diametrics are notorious for producing supplemental time and price action, and that's when a market passes its ideal point. This is the ideal time that we talked about on the half-year chart, where it finishes right up with this high. So here is the ideal time to finish the bigger picture. This is part of the supplemental time, and this would be part of supplemental price, where it goes a little bit higher and it takes more time. So on the big picture, we're in supplemental price and time. On the smaller picture, we're in a diametric, which also allows for supplemental price and time. So it's going to go even a little bit longer than the 6 monthly charts would suggest. And that's why I think we're going to peak right around the ideal time, which we're close, but not quite there yet. If we make another new high, then this peak is only going to be one data point away from this ideal point. So I think there's a good chance that this month we're going to make a new high, and then we'll get a sell-off right after. So that'll finish wave C slightly to the right. I'm going to move it. I think it'll be finished right about there. Then we'll start this D wave correction, and then we'll get the supplemental price and time for the monthly chart. Okay, and so that's where the bigger picture appears to be on a monthly basis, and you can see how easy it is for us to produce this wave count, because we've taken a 6 monthly chart, a 2.5 year chart, a very clear wave structure, everything follows the rules, and we forced it onto our monthly chart, discovered where our X wave was, and then we just counted from there. So we didn't have to go back 15, 20, 30 years and count a monthly chart all the way back to the beginning. We know what the big picture is. All we need to do is figure out what the small picture is from this point forward. And based on all the time evidence, we're in a diametric. So if we're in a diametric, we're in the G wave, and in the G wave, we're about to finish the C wave. The G wave has to expand because the thrust is substandard. So it gives us a very clear picture of where we are on a monthly basis. So once we have that clear picture, we don't want to focus on all of this for the weekly chart because we already know what the bigger picture is. We don't need to reassess it and reconfirm it. We need to just force this structure onto a weekly chart and then focus on what happens with the very last leg on the weekly charts. So we get to our weekly chart, and here's the F wave. Notice I don't have any of the price structure because it's not important. We've already handled that and managed that on a monthly chart. So our focus is figuring out on the weekly chart what's going on. And I've forced this monthly structure onto this weekly chart. So here's the expanding triangle. I'm going to say a triangle now because we have some clear time differences instead of it just being any expanding pattern. See, wave B takes less time than wave A. That's not allowed in flats. It's not allowed in zigzags. It normally won't happen in diametrics, but it is allowed in triangles. So the fact that wave B takes less time than wave A virtually guarantees when a triangle, which reinforces the expanding triangle idea. Okay, so you can see here wave C is just a tad bit longer in price and time than wave A. The two green triangles are the same price and time. And so we're getting very close to making a new high. I think the minute we make a new high for wave C, it's going to be finished. We're going to get the biggest correction we've had in quite some time. The minute that's going to happen, it's going to overlap this range here, and people are going to think, oh man, it's dropped a lot. The high must be in. You know, we're taking a long time. It's started a new bear market. That is the psychology of an expanding environment. There's perpetual doubt, constant suspicion, multitude of reasons to not believe what's happening. You know, fundamental news does not agree with the advance. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't feel right. And it constantly feels like every peak is the top. That's where I think we are. I think it's pretty obvious. There's not a lot of super optimistic news out there. There's a lot of concerns in the world. So this is going to continue until we get to this point up here. And then the news is going to be amazing. And, you know, the market's going to go to the moon and we're in a new period and, you know, all that kind of stuff. All the problems will probably be resolved. We'll have trades with China and trades with Canada complete, and all that stuff's going to be done, and political news is going to get great, fundamental news is going to get great, and then finally we're going to have the biggest top that we've had in 10 years or 12 years since 2007's high. So this is the weekly structure. Now notice the weekly structure is starting to get very difficult to identify. This looks like a zigzag, but I have no idea what this is. I mean, that is a structural mess. And because it's so difficult